Buongiorno a tutti, benvenuti. È un piacere essere qua oggi con la dottoressa Turner, che ci fa l'onore e il piacere di passare mezz'ora con noi per parlare di osteopatia, soprattutto di osteopatia nell'ambito delle tecniche indirette, e per presentare il nuovo libro a riguardo che è appena uscito e che è stato pubblicato da poco. La dottoressa Turner non ha bisogno di presentazioni, la conosciamo tutti, è tanto tempo che insegna in tutto il mondo. E dottor Turner, it's a pleasure to have you with us here. The first question is an obvious question, and is why did you decide to write this book?
Well, that's a good question. I was very interested in the work I'd seen Dr. Wales do using balanced ligamentous tension, which is Dr. Sutherland's approach to the body as a whole, beyond the cranium, that not so many people know about it. Many people have written about the cranial work that he explored, but there's very little written about the work that he used all his professional life, that is such an important part of his work. And when Anne Wales invited me and a small group of English people to come and study with her with a view to teaching it, what was behind that was that she felt very deeply committed to Dr. Sutherland's work on the body, on the whole body as a whole, being passed on, that people should know it. And her fear was that it would get lost. And our little group went out there and we started to teach courses. We started to teach it also at the European School of Osteopathy. But I was aware that because it was unfamiliar to people and there was no textbook apart from the appendix in Teaching Science of Osteopathy by Lippincott, that because there wasn't a reference book, that it would not be taken really as seriously as it should. And we found it such a gift, such an enhancing gift to all aspects of our osteopathic work, that we really wanted it to be available to people. And the courses we've taught, people have really enjoyed and said that just as Anne Wales unlocked something for us, many people have said that it's actually helped them hugely with treating all kinds of things they hadn't been able to treat before.
Thank you, Sue. You talk a lot in your book about Anne Wells and Roland Becker. And could you describe which is, in your opinion, the most important difference between these two great osteopaths, and which is, in your opinion, the most important legacy that both of them left to us?
Well, on the surface of it, I didn't know Dr. Becker so well. In fact, I went on a couple of courses he taught on, and I only had one conversation with him. And that was when I asked him, when people speak of the stillness in the moving tide, I can only sense that as another dimension. Is that right? And he said, yep, it's another dimension. It's the fourth dimension. And then he walked off because he was a man of few words. So I can't say, I can't speak like Rachel Brooks can on Dr. Becker, but they were actually very close friends, Anne Wells and Alan Becker and Roland Becker, and deeply respected each other and deeply supported each other through their correspondence in difficult times in each of their lives. Anne Wells she was very grounded. There was a feeling that she was like Mount Gran Sasso. She was
Okay, Monte Gran Sasso, fantastic.
Gran Sasso.
Fantastic metaphor, yeah.
She was really plugged into the earth and to the sky as well. And if you asked her something, and she also had a very deep spiritual life, which she didn't speak of much. If you asked her something too esoteric, she'd say, well, my ancestors were farmers and carpenters, and I like to keep things simple. But actually, when she treated, you could feel this connection between Mother Earth and this alignment between earth and heaven that made you feel completely safe. There was something completely safe and stable. And that feeling of safety allowed your body to a great freedom to make its own changes very spontaneously. Roland Becker, I think later in his life, he really emphasized how we are in ourselves. He used very little what we call technique. mean, when Anne used technique, she went beyond technique. She was listening, she was engaging, she was in total contact all the time. And that was the essential thing behind what we call technique. Roland Becker really emphasized the principles and how important it was to be still in yourself. And there are two things that really stand out to me. One is Rachel Brooks said that before he would go in to treat a patient, he would inwardly say, "Thank you for allowing me to watch you heal yourself." And so there was this, what he communicated, I think, is this sense of reverence for the privilege of touch, the privilege of being present in that space with another person and their healing process. And that healing process, I think he didn't say as such, but it was rooted in the divine nature of all things. In one of his letters to to Sutherland, he said that he sensed that the breath of life is the same as the space that creates the universe. And is it the stillness of life, or is it life in motion? I think it's the stillness of life.
I think it's the stillness of life, yes. What
There's
you're
a,
mentioning,
yeah, there's a page that Rachel has put together of different quotes called Steps to Take. And one of them that I remember constantly is, accept the living mechanism in yourself and your patient. Know that what the mechanism is telling you is true. And surrender comes after acceptance. And he said that the most important thing is accept the living mechanism in yourself and the patient. And I find there's a wealth of usefulness, depth in that. Because if you accept the living mechanism in yourself as a separate entity, you accept the living mechanism in the patient as a separate entity. The living mechanism doesn't belong to each of you. It's rooted in the same thing. And so it takes you to a place of support from something universal, and also for the respect that within that patient, or whatever you are invited to do by the patient's body, there is a wisdom, there is an intelligence that is theirs. It is that from their deep, deep, deep resource, which you can trust. And there's something about, if I'm completely in my space and they're completely in their space as two separate individuals, the paradox is that in acknowledging that, there's a bridge of empathy that is built. And in that bridge of empathy, it's like a conduit for information that the patient's body needs to communicate to oneself in order to be able to serve them. And I find that immensely useful. I come back to that all the time.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you so much. And this brings me to the next question. What I found really interesting and really important in your book is that, in my personal opinion, you were able to put together the two aspects that are involved in BLT technique. The one is the technique that you have to do with your hands or something like this, but on the other hand, what you have to feel and how you have to feel as a person while you are doing the technique, you are doing the treatment. And I found this really very, very, very important. And I didn't find this in any other book, sincerely. It's unique what you did, in my opinion. About this topic. I found that you decided to describe in the beginning of the book in a very precise way the mechanical position from the biomechanical point of view, in which position you have to take the joint, which is not the same. So emphasize this concept in Teaching in the Science of Osteopathy appendix. And it brings me back to the Huber balance and Dott concept of a balance tension technique. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I suppose it took us quite a long time when we went to visit Anne Wales a number of times, it was for 5 days at a time. And we would watch her and we would try and do it as she did it. But there were a lot of things she didn't say that were, to me, the kind of ABC of it. And we took a long time to get the hang of it. And as we started teaching, we tried more and more to bring it down to very simple starting principles like toddler steps.
Okay.
And I wasn't aware that I was expressing it differently from the Lippincott appendix. I think perhaps to me what I see as maybe different is that we talk about the toddler steps. For instance, and Anne Wales once, when she demonstrated the very basics, she said, with the finger, take it to its position of ease, motion test it in all directions, and find this position of ease in all components. So if you start with the position of ease, you're at the as near as possible to the point of balance between all the containing connective tissues. If you start at that point, you're getting near the point of minimal resistance to the inherent self-corrective potency in the body. And then once you've taken it to that position of ease, then you need to awaken the ligaments, either to approximate a little or distract a little, to see which wakes them up, so that they begin to then explore, to find a much more precise point of balance tension. That is where all the vectors are balanced in all directions around a neutral point. And from there you wait and you watch and you respect the body's inherent forces until there's a spontaneous resolution. And then the end point to me is you feel this lengthening and thinning, shortening and pattern fattening, as if the inherent motion, primary respiratory motion, is coming through. And there's a whole different change in the tissues, in the quality, in the fluidity, in the rhythmicity, in the vitality of and three-dimensional space. And I suppose when you've taken the twists out of a place, there is more space, because twists take up the space, and untwist it and there's more expansion. And that is something that that breaking it down into those stages, we got the hang of that from Anne Wales, but more, she didn't explain it in quite so explicitly as that. But what we felt that by breaking it down into those stages, it was helpful for teaching, because then you could say, oh, now you're, this is fine, you're at this stage now. Do you this, and now you're at this stage now. So people would know what to look for, because very often I've noticed that in teaching cranial as well, when people come to the balance point where it goes still, it's very easy to think you've lost it. What's the difference between which sort of there's one sort of nothing happening, which is a very potent point of balance and stillness, and there's another where actually it's still and nothing's happening because you've lost it, or you've squashed it, or you've intruded too much in your mind and it's gone too shy and is hiding. So just to be aware of, the importance of staying with that point of balance, stillness. And the question I ask sometimes at that point is, if I expect nothing, what's happening? Because then I can check in with myself to see if I'm projecting something, imposing something or not. I don't know if I quite answered your question, but
No.
I suppose basically, if it's different.
In the first 30 seconds, you answered to my question, and then you go ahead with something else very, very interesting.
I wasn't aware it was different from what Lippincott said. Just maybe
No, it's not
something that
different.
he perhaps took for granted. We were all much cleverer than we really are, and a lot of us need to kind of go step by step.
Yeah. What I found different personally was that in teaching the science of osteopathy, what is described is only the technique.
Yes.
It is not described in which way to arrive the technique, and what the operator, the practitioner, has to do, has to feel,
yes,
to become effective, to permit to the technique to be effective.
Yes, yes,
And
yes,
I found interesting that you emphasize these two different moments and aspects that are very important.
yes, yes. I suppose what I really appreciate about Roland Becker is he's looking at the process. He's looking very much at the process. And we tried to look at the process behind the technique, because technique is only really a simplification, a shorthand for a process. But it's the process that's important, isn't that moment-to-moment listening, that moment-to-moment presence, that moment-to-moment respecting the intelligence within the system and what it's asking for us. If it's asking for us to do something direct, or if it's asking us just to wait for it to do what it needs to do, holding the space.
Fantastic. Thank you. Now I would like to ask you a couple of questions about the attempt, because of course it's only an attempt to justify why these kind of techniques are effective. And you told in the book about the concept of tensegrity, and in the book you talk about the importance of the ligament concept and what happened inside the ligament in a specific way. Would you like to explain a little bit these two concepts with us? These two aspects?
Well, I'll start with if I may, the ligament. But I mean, I don't know if I've got a huge amount to say about tensegrity, except that the soft tissues of the body are a part of a tensegrity system, in which the bones as the solid, the supportive struts, are held together and defy gravity through the tensional elements, which are the soft tissues. And so in a way, Buckminster Fuller's geodesic dome follows the same principles that a healthy joint does. But why the ligaments? Well, really, that goes back to was it a page 160 of Teachings on the Science of Osteopathy, or Contributions of Thought by Sutherland, and it's page 112 in the first edition. Sutherland recalls being a student, and I do put this in the book. I love this story. He recalls being a student in the student clinic, and he said, Dr. Still has taken my hands into his and allowed me to feel the lesion as it exaggerated, and then as the ligaments pulled the bones back into place. And I have this picture of Dr. Still, who, by the size of his gloves, had very big hands. I have this picture of Sutherland with the patient seated and his hands on a knee joint, and Dr. Still coming along and putting his big hands over Sutherland's hands, and then helping him feel this thing he'd never felt before, this aha moment where he felt what the joint was doing, exaggerating its strain pattern, pausing, and then this spontaneous coming back to a position of correction. And that was an aha moment for Sutherland, I think. And in that same passage, he refers to that it's the ligaments, not the muscles, that are the agencies of correction at the joints. And there is the same principle is applicable in the cranial mechanism, where the membranes are the agencies of correction. And that's why he talked about joints as ligamentous articular mechanisms and cranial strain patterns as membranous articular mechanisms, which had ligamentous articular strains as osteopathic lesions, or membranous articular strains as osteopathic lesions. So I think that this evolved from that realization of his, which was reinforced when he saw this dissection with all the ligaments left in and all the other tissues taken out, in 1919. So it is evolved from what he explored, finding that if you engage with the ligaments rather than the muscles, there would be this process that enlivened. And we now know, I mean, even then, actually, in 1900, was it somebody called Bohr, I think a German, had written about the neural connections between the ligaments and the spinal neural and the central and the joints already. We now have a great body of research over the last 120 years about that relationship between the ligaments of the joints and their proprioceptive conversation with the central nervous system. But it's not just that you're only interested in the ligaments. The ligaments are a way in. They are a way in to the whole joint three-dimensional mechanism of the joint space, the joint space between the quality of the tissues, the quality of everything that's contained in that ligamentous articular mechanism, and its relationship to the central nervous system. And in the cranial mechanism, just as we have balanced ligamentous tension for the joints of the body, in the cranium we have balanced membranous tension, on the principle that because the bones are formed within the membrane, they float, in a sense, they encompass in the membrane. If you bring the membrane to balance, the dural balance to dural balance, the bones are in a position of balanced tension in relation to each other. But also, that dural globe encompasses the brain. So when you get the container into a position of balance, what is contained also experiences balance, or experiences the possibility to change the fluid dynamic, the possibility of fluid interchange within. And when it comes to the organs of the body, because osteopaths of the generation of Anne Wales and the Beckers and Dr. Still, they very much treated all the organs, but very much from that way of bringing the container, the ligament, the joint, the organ capsule to a position of balance, so that once again, whatever was necessary within the contained space could make its own adjustments as an organ, like for instance the liver, the kidney, the lungs, the heart, pericardium.
Yes, suddenly, dear Susan, you anticipate my question, the next question. I would like to talk with you about the why you decided in your book to put some emphasis on what happened on the viscera. You already described this, and also in some points of the books, on some pages, you decide, I saw, to add what can happen while you are treating a joint to some viscera in correspondence to what you are treating. And I found this also very interesting. Yeah.
Well, in a way that I think that was Anne Wales's way of thinking, which I think her teacher Sutherland and his teacher Still saw that constant connection. And one of the things I find beautiful about osteopathy, which I can't understand why people find it hard to understand, is this awesome relationship between the skeletal, the ligamentous articular skeletal, the whole skeleton, the structure and the function. How when you change the structural relationships, you actually alter the space in which the organs are functioning. So in a way, whenever we put our hands on the body, we're affecting physiology. And that's we see it again and again in so many ways, that beautiful interaction between physiology and anatomy. And yes, Anne Wales said that when she was just a new graduate in 1926, she was working in hospital as an intern and had to treat pneumonia cases 5 minutes around the clock for 10 days. And this idea that if you're just disengaging the ribs on the supine patient, you're disengaging the costovertebral junction, you're allowing a little bit more movement of the costovertebral junction. So you're allowing a little bit less resistance for the lungs to work and decongest themselves. And you're also affecting the circulation into the spine and the spinal cord itself. And you're affecting the reflexes that interact with higher centers. And you're also, of course, affecting the reflexes to the lungs themselves by relaxing the neural facilitatory load. And that's just one example. And again, I mean, she would talk about, and I talked about this in the book, you change you change the container by making the containing space balanced, and what is within then alters its physiology, its blood flow, its lymph flow. And it's just a space to be, space to breathe, space to move.
I have two more questions for you. The last one related to the book and is this. At a certain point of the book, there's a passage in which you talk about a sort of you need to move from a BLT concept to a balance fluid tension concept. Could you describe this passage in your mind? What which is the meaning of this?
Well, I think that I might have put that in with reference to treating an active Osgood-Schlatter's knee.
I think yes.
Where actually
the
ligaments just wouldn't engage. Nothing would engage until I acknowledged the extracellular matrix. And so then I was interacting with the fluid dynamics. And the concept of balance, which I use often with the ligaments and the membranes and the fascia, applies itself on whatever level is the body calls us, whatever level it deigns to respond. And that sometimes takes you into the sense of the fluid matrix of the body, and finding, in a sense, a quality of stillness and balance and poise, or poised for change on that level. And so ligaments aren't everything. All tissues have that quality of organizing themselves, sometimes by slightly exaggerating or fully expressing their strain, their pushes and pulls, till they find a neutral. And that applies to the fluid as well. And I think when we find balance point in a joint through the ligaments, that is happening on a fluid level as well. Ideally, it should happen through all levels of tissue expression to engage with the vital force, the breath of life, whatever one chooses to call it. It engages with its vital potential. Mm-hmm. So I think sometimes it's, if something's not responding on the tissue one is engaging with, to ask the question, where does it need me to engage? If there's something I'm not seeing, something I'm not looking at, that requires to be seen in order that it can find its way. And I suppose I noticed a long time ago that when treating the 12th ribs, sometimes the 12th ribs would respond, and there'd be a whole lovely change in the whole area. And then sometimes it wouldn't. And I realized that there's something I'm not seeing. And it would be often that an organ within that articular basket of the lower ribs was having a struggle. And it wasn't until I acknowledged the presence of the organ within that space, for instance, the kidney, that viscerosomatico-visceral reflex between the containing structures and the organ were able to reorganize. And then the 12th rib would let go. But it wouldn't until I'd acknowledged what the viscerosomatic cause was. It's like the body knows when you're acknowledging what it wants to have acknowledged.
So in such a way, you are saying that in some cases you have the hand in one point, but you need to be aware of what happened in other part of the body.
Sometimes, yes, or sometimes a deeper dimension of the body in that area. And sometimes to acknowledge, to be aware of the cause. Sometimes it calls you to acknowledge a particular point in time or a particular emotional experience that's held in the tissues. And when either the cause in past time or the cause in present time on another level are acknowledged, then says, Now you've seen me, somebody's seen me. Now I can let go because I've been seen, or something.
Thank you so much. My last question is not related to the book, but is related to why in your opinion is important this kind of book. You know that now we are in a moment in which things are changing from the recognition here in Italy, but also a lot of change in Europe in the recognition of osteopathy in a sort of huge ultra and very massive scientific or ultra scientific way we have to do and recognize with the evidence-based medicine everything. We need to be able to give an explanation to all we are doing and blah, 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 blah. Why it's important a book like this in this context that goes in totally probably not in another direction, or better, the question could be how we can put together and mesh up something so related to feeling, to what we feel, and to something very scientific and very evidence-based.
Well, it's
not this politically incorrect question, I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's probably the ancient battle between the left and the right brain. The left brain
Fantastic.
the need to categorize, this is my librarian self. I've got everything on nice, neat shelves in order, and I need to have that. And then the right brain, which is empathetic, multidimensional, universal, intuitive, and to do with three-dimensional space. And so we're working with the body in three-dimensional space. But what should happen, according to Ian McGilchrist's work, is that the left brain, or the right brain has the experience. The left brain tries to make sense of it. And then instead of hanging on to it and saying, now this is all it is, which happens, reductionism, it should give it back to the left brain. And so the left brain can then actually take it further because it's now got a little bit more order in it. And so there should be this nice balance. But what seems to have happened in so many areas is that we've opted for a very reductionist, it's only this, it's nothing but model. And in a way, there is a use to evidence-based medicine, but the danger is that if we wait endlessly for something to have been proved before we dare do it, everybody will be dead.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that amuses us constantly with us osteopaths, we pat ourselves on the back and say, oh yes, well, that's just been discovered. Well, about time too. We knew that 120 years ago. You know, like in the 1990s, one of the most eminent teachers in the world, an anatomist, said, cerebrospinal fluid, what's all the fuss about? It's just brain pee. Andrew Taylor Still having said it's the highest known element in the body, and unless it furnishes the substance in abundance, a disabled condition of the body will remain. He who is able to reason must see that this great river of life must be tapped and the withering fields irrigated, or the harvest of health will be forever lost. Well, what is so lovely, and it happens again and again in so many ways, is that in 2012, even was it Illich, discovered that through the new tracing methods, that the subarachnoid space fluid, the cerebrospinal fluid, enters through the paravascular pathways and and also through the whole brain the cortical surface, is drawn into the brain and carries out the byproducts of metabolism, such as amyloid beta, which is associated with Alzheimer's disease, and carries it into the blood system, particularly when we're asleep. And then in 2016 was some more research about the importance of the lymphatics of the brain, which do the same thing. And that's just, there are so many examples of what our ancestors knew with their hands, their hearts, and their minds, and their experience with their patients and what the patient's body taught them, that are now being experienced in labs. So I think we should not be afraid of trusting ourselves. But what's so interesting is not so much, there isn't so much evidence from osteopathic work itself that have big enough studies to make waves. But what's so interesting is looking at the things we say and the philosophy of osteopathy and the way anatomy and physiology work together, the way that is continually reinforced by modern research, and particularly also in the field of the lymphatics, what's being discovered more and more in the lymphatic system. And when we know that, we can enjoy that research and we can use it, but to enhance also our credibility, but also our credibility with ourselves. So I think that when we all very much enjoy, don't we, keeping up with what the physiological research that's so often relevant to what we do. And the other thing is, I mean, for instance, I think there was a very simple study recently at Kirksville that observed, I think it might have been the students did it, I can't remember, that when the occipito-atlantal joint is released, there is a huge increase in arterial perfusion in the brain and also in venous drainage. And that's so simple, just releasing the occiput from the atlas. So if that is so, what about all the other things we do? I'm not afraid of the need to prove, the need for have evidence-based, because I think that there are other ways of appreciating the work of science. And there are people like Lisa Hodge, for instance, has done huge lot of research on experimental animals, on the immune system using old osteopathic techniques, and finding that through simple abdominal lymphatic pumps, there's a massive increase in immune cells in the system with a positive effect on pneumonia. So I'm not too worried. I just wish my colleagues weren't worried.
Dr. Turner, Susan, thank you so much for your time. Now I pass to Italian to introduce one more time your book. Ringraziamo tantissimo la dottoressa Turner per il tempo che ci ha dedicato e vi ricordiamo che è uscito il suo libro Balance Ligamentous Tension in Osteopathic Practice e vi consiglio caldamente la lettura perché è veramente un libro molto molto interessante. Sue, thank you so much for your time. Okay.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.